All right, everybody. Well, thank you very much for joining me again on this talk. This is an interesting topic, again, probably a little more controversial. An elephant in the room for sure for people who've been to stamp shops or to stamp shows. And I've seen a lot of comments online about it. And it has to do with dealers being, arrogant or grumpy or snippy with their customers or just not seeming to take collectors seriously. And a general perception that there's a bad attitude out there amongst stamp dealers. And I mean, there's obvious explanations for some of this. It could just be that the personality of the particular dealer is, somebody who's just prone to being bad tempered or not a people person. Um, that's an obvious one. Um, or it could also be that they're struggling with their business and they're not happy about that and they're not good at regulating that in a professional setting. Those are obvious ones, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on those. I mean, I'll get into touching on them a little bit, but I want to do a bit of a deeper dive. And in organizing this talk, I mean, I've got a number of points that I want to refer to in my notes here. But the thing that sort of lies at the center of it, which I want to start with before I get into the specific reasons, are I want to talk a little bit about stamp dealing itself and what I think good stamp dealing is and what it entails and what it requires. So, good stamp dealing, successful stamp dealing is all about getting the largest number of stamps that are correctly described, fairly degraded, and fairly priced into the hands of as many collectors as possible. I mean, those of us that want to support the hobby and want to see it grow and want to see it flourish, that's our goal. We want to take the stamps that are out there and put them in the hands of the people that can appreciate them. And what that means is that a good dealer should be able to cover the budgetary needs of many different types of collectors. They're looking to match the stamps to the right home. Um, that's where I see the main mission of a good stamp dealer. And in accomplishing that, there are many other things that a stamp dealer does besides just provide the stamps. But the main focus of being a good dealer involves, therefore, a lot of repetition, a lot of consistency, and a lot of variety. Because a good dealer has to be able to offer variety of different stamps because all the collectors out there are different and want different things. And you can't, if you're running an auction like I am on a weekly basis, you can't run the same material week after week after week because you're only going to hit a small percentage of the collectors each time. So you have to be able to consistently source material. You have to make sure there's enough variety to provide collectors as many different collectors as possible with the variety they're looking for. And you have to be able to do it in a way that allows you to make enough of a profit to stay in business. And you have to be able to do that consistently. And that's not easy. Um, and that brings me to my first point about dealers as a whole. There's a general perception out in the collector milieu that dealers as a whole are greedy and that dealers are after money primarily. And I think that's a misconception. Um, I think that there are dealers who have a great focus on the financial end of the transactions they're involved in. But I think in most cases, that's simply a function of the overheads and the costs that they face. I don't believe that most dealers who are in this business for a long time are here because they think they're going to make a lot of money. My experience now with 10 years into this is that it allows a person to make what I would call a modest living, a modest lower middle class living. It's not by any means the road to riches. It might have been at one point in the past when prices for stamps were much higher than they are today. But with today's competition and today's pricing, no, I don't believe that there's enough profit in this business for somebody to get rich. Not by any stretch of the imagination. And I think when I get into telling you about the specifics of what a dealer has to face, I think you'll agree with me that most people that are capable of starting a business from scratch like this, building it up, and making it a success, probably possess the skill set that would be more than adequate for them to make far, far more money if they worked for a large corporation in another industry. So I don't think, even if they got into this because they thought they were going to do very well financially, if they're still here 10, 20, 30 years in, then I don't believe that could possibly be their primary motivator, because it's simply they just wouldn't be able to last and find the motivation that they need if that was their motive. So it's a very major misconception that I think collectors have of dealers as a whole. So now that I've explained what being a stamp dealer involves, let's go back and look at the actual forms that being grumpy could take. So there's in my mind there's two different categories. There's general snippetiness or snappiness that it comes in a short burst, and it's forgotten in 5 minutes. You go to a dealer's table, he's a little bit snippy with you, but 5 minutes later he's acting like it didn't happen. And in those cases, what I think that is it's purely non-personal. It has nothing to do with you as the customer. It's most likely to be his inability to regulate his emotions in the face of a number of things that have happened in that particular day. So you could have a dealer that, say, he goes to a show, and he's 2 days into the show, and it's been very slow, and he realizes he's not only not going to make any money at the show, he's not going to cover all the costs of his table. So he's upset about that. Then he has somebody come up to him in the show and return an item to him that he had sold them 2 or 3 months before. Um, and the person informs him that it just came back with a bad certificate from VG Green and that they're returning it. So now he's out whatever he paid for that stamp, plus the certificate fee, plus he can't sell it as what he bought it for. So that's another disappointment. Um, then he goes and he checks his bids at the auction that just closed 3 days ago that he was bidding on, and discovers that he didn't succeed on a number of the bids that he wanted, especially the main item that he was looking for. He discovers that he lost it in a tie bid, and he didn't break the tie. So he's upset about that. And then you come along and you ask a perfectly innocent question, but he's feeling frustrated from everything else he's had to deal with, and he just snaps for no good reason. So a lot of times when that happens, you don't know as a collector everything that dealer has had to face. That's not an excuse. I mean, a good dealer who's a professional should be able to modulate um, his behavior, his emotions, um, well enough to be able to not take that out on you as the customer. That's for sure. But that's one possible cause. But the one that I really want to look at in the talk today is the slower burn. Okay, the slower resentments that dealers are carrying, um, which are either towards specific customers and their customer base, or they're to the customer base in general. Um, and I mean, when I talk about resentment, that's a fairly strong word. But really, what it boils down to is not feeling appreciated, not feeling that all the aspects of the value proposition that you put out there as a dealer are being seen by your customers or valued in the way that you feel they should be valued. I mean, I think everybody who does a job, anybody who's professional or dedicated to what they do, wants to be appreciated for that thing. I think that type of appreciation is important. I don't think anybody, even if you have a very high paying job, if you're not appreciated for the work that you're doing, it's very difficult to feel happy doing that job. And I think for stamp dealers, it's especially acute because there are a lot of smaller, intangible tidbits of value that they provide their customers that they don't often get any explicit recognition for. And a lot of times they don't get any financial recognition. Um, so what are some examples of that of those types of um, value points? Well, a good dealer does more than just supply the stamps. Okay, if he buys a collection to break it down and to sell the stamps to you, he's acting as a kind of filter. So he's filtering out the forgeries, he's filtering out the damaged stamps, he's filtering out the misdescribed stamps, and he's taking them. They all come in the form of a collection that the auction house he buys them from, or the private collector he buys them from, has described them as. And he runs them through his professional filter, and what comes out the other end are his descriptions, which will mention the faults that are there on the stamps. He'll mention if the stamps are forgeries or reprints. He'll back up what his conclusions are with his experience or his research, and he'll provide peace of mind to those purchases through his knowledge. Um, he will also be giving you the freedom to buy when you want. So a large part of the challenge in the stamp business has always been, with the right amount of patience, you can always find whatever it is that you want. The problem is you don't always find it when you have the money to make the purchase or when the circumstances otherwise line up for you the way you would like them to. And that's a major challenge. So when a dealer buys at retail, one of the things that they're doing is they're investing a lot of their money in buying that collection, breaking it down, and holding it for people until those people feel that they're in a position to buy the stamps that they want. Um, Now, part of that is also a number of the stamps in any given collection are not going to sell for one reason or another. Either they're very common, or the dealer already has a lot of them, or just doesn't have enough customers to exhaust the supply. So, anytime a dealer buys a collection, there's always going to be a small percentage of the material that they are either not going to be able to sell at a retail level, or they're going to have to just bulk lot them and take a very low price for. So there's some risk involved in buying any lot. And so what a dealer does when they buy a lot and break it down and describe everything, they're mitigating, or in most cases, completely eliminating the risk that you would face as a buyer if you were buying those lots directly. So those are all major value points in my mind, but they're usually overlooked by collectors. Another thing a good dealer does, if he knows his customers, he's able to advise them about their collecting, not just what they're collecting, but how to put the collection together. If a customer wants to put an exhibit together, a good dealer who's knowledgeable knows which pieces you need to have in that exhibit in order to get the medal for the judges. Um, he'll also, if you're struggling at finding something that you want to collect that suits your budget. So let's say, you're really interested in small queens or large queens and you get into them, but you find you get frustrated because you can't find them in the level of quality that you want for the price that you want to pay. A good stamp dealer can look at the fact that you're collecting these exquisitely engraved stamps, and he can make a suggestion that you try something completely different. He could say, well, gee, have you ever considered collecting, Waterloo issues from the 1890s from, you know, Venezuela, or sorry, Uruguay, Costa Rica, and North Borneo and Labuan? Have you considered those? Those are all very affordable areas. They're beautiful stamps. They're usually bicolored. They're all engraved. Have you considered that? So a good dealer knows how to take what their knowledge is of you and use it to help you get the most out of your collecting experience. A good dealer provides you with a succession plan. So if you're collecting for a long time, you will build up a lot of stamps, and most lifetime collections and accumulations are in between a 25,000 to $100,000 range of value. And a lot of collectors die without any succession plan in place for their family to follow. And it's a very, very stressful thing for the family. I'm dealing with one right now where it's a consignment, and the family's inherited the stamps, but they really don't know what they're worth, and they're out there trying to research it. And it's taking a great deal of time and effort, and of course they're afraid of getting taken advantage of, and it's just very, very stressful for them. But if that family member had a good relationship to a dealer, and the family had a relationship with that dealer and had been introduced to that dealer, the dealer would simply step in and make a cash offer for everything and take it off their hands. And there would be enough trust built up between the parties that the family would have peace of mind at knowing it was being handled fairly and professionally. So a good dealer provides an outlet for the material at the end of the collector's life cycle, that they wouldn't otherwise have. So, when you look at what the common denominator to all of these value points is, it's basically trust, knowledge, and liquidity. That's what dealers provide: trust, knowledge, and liquidity to the stamp buying process. Without dealers, those things would not exist in the way that they do in the stamp market now. And we take them for granted as collectors because they're there and because there are a significant number of dealers still in the game providing those things silently. But if you took dealers out of the picture, a lot of what exists in organized philately would simply collapse because there's nothing to back it up. Values would probably decline further because a large part of what buoys up competition is the knowledge that you could at least get X number of dollars from a dealer. But if you don't have that floor in place, um, then it will affect the values negatively. Um, so it's and I mean liquidity is a big one. Most collectors may get comments occasionally from their friends that, oh, I'd buy your collection in a heartbeat, um, and so on and so forth. But there's a big difference between comments from other collectors and actual hard cash from a dealer. Um, most dealers, when they make an offer, they stand behind it and they're ready and willing to act. Um, and that's just not the case for collectors, generally speaking. So dealers are a very great source of liquidity to the market in general. And without them, I fear that we would have a situation similar to matchbooks or bottle caps or uh, matchbox cars, or you pick anything that's collectible that you know has a value potentially, but it's just there isn't an organized way to price it. And that's what you would have without professional dealers in the picture. So, I mean, those are all, very significant points of value, and most of them are not captured in the transactions process. I mean, a retail dealer tries to capture that in their price. So when they're charging you, 60, 70, 80% of catalog for a stamp, what you're paying them for is everything I just mentioned, plus the stamp itself. So the stamp at a wholesale, if you buy the stamp at a wholesale auction and you pay 30% of catalog and they're charging you 80, the other 50% is all the other value points that I just mentioned. But a lot of collectors don't put any explicit value on those things. And so they're not willing to pay the 80%, when they could just go at an auction and buy it for 30. So it's very frustrating for dealers operating in a retail space because it's getting harder and harder for them to make a living. Um, so that's one thing. They're not feeling appreciated about what they're providing in terms of value. Now, the other thing that they may not feel appreciated on is what they've had to do to overcome all the obstacles that are in their way to be a dealer and to serve the hobby. Um, this isn't something that most dealers necessarily expect of their customers in today's environment, but the lack of it does, in addition to the other things that I've just mentioned, it does make it harder for them to feel the appreciation from their customers that they feel they deserve. And there's a number of pressures on dealers now. It's far harder to make a living today as a dealer than it used to be because prices for stamps have come down due to increased competition. Not because there's less demand, not because there are fewer collectors, in my opinion, as I've said in my other videos, but um, the main reason being because the effective supply of stamps that's available um, in the marketplace has gone up, and it's caused prices to fall, and it's made it so that dealers have to sell 2 to 3 times as many stamps now to make a living that they would have had to have sold in, say, 1985 or 1990. Um, and so what this all means is that the main constraint that's on dealers now, that in terms of resources, is their time. It's not their inventory. I mean, a dealer who's got access to a good credit line can go and buy. He can jump on Stamp Auction Network and he can buy from any one of 3 dozen auction houses around the world, and he can get access to fantastic material. Um, I mean, not all. Some will be more profitable than others. Some will be more expensive than others, but there's enough material out there at all times that's not getting material is not the problem. The problem is being able to process the material quickly enough to and in enough volume to get enough dollars to be able to cover all of the overheads and costs of running a business. So for my example, okay, I run a weekly auction and I have two employees, which I absolutely need to have because every single lot that I sell has to be described. It has to be scanned, usually front and back. And all of those descriptions have to be entered into Excel and uploaded to the website. And those are all very different tasks. When I get the stamps, the actual lotting process involves going through, picking the stamp out, examining it thoroughly, coming up with checking for faults, assigning a grade to it, looking it up in the catalog, and in any other literature that I feel may apply to the particular printing or shade or whatever it is I'm working with. I have to craft a description based on everything that I've read. And I have to record that description um, in shorthand that somebody later on, i.e., Will or Josh, can then go and translate that shorthand into a full description, write it out in Excel, and then upload it to the website. And then they have to get all the photos, and that's a very labor-intensive process. It means that there's only on a good day, if you're working, a full 8-hour day, the guys can probably enter 50 lots. That's the most they could do in one day. For me, if I'm powering through and I'm working 12 or 14 or 15 hours, I may be able to enter and scan 100 lots. If it's stuff that I know like the back of my hand and I've sold many, many times before. But it's still that's me working flat out for that full time period. In a week, it's possible maybe to get 500 lots done in that week. And so, when you're running a business like that on a weekly basis, your cost structure, your stamps are only about a third of the cost. Okay, the other two-thirds come from the labor, so the salaries and employee benefits and um, source deductions paid to the guys. And the overhead is things like the mailers that I buy to put the stamps in, the 102 cards, the plastic bags to prevent them from getting wet, all my subscriptions to Shopify to be on there, the subscriptions for the software that I use to do all the images. Um, it would also include all my professional associations that I'm part of to demonstrate my credibility as a dealer, um, any stationery and other supplies that I use in the course of lotting the stamps or holding the auction, any postage that I'm unable to recover from my customers. I mean, because I don't always bill everybody exactly what the postage was. Quite often, I'll get an overage of 50 cents or a dollar, and I don't really feel like billing somebody 50 cents. So I just eat it. And that becomes part of my overhead cost. So, it's that's doing all of that every week generally means that if I take a given month, 1 week is spent covering source deductions. 1 week is to cover my mortgage and the other living costs I have for that week. Another week covers the material that I bought, and then the fourth week covers my overhead for the business. And so each week is about making enough money to cover the bills. And so, my time is entirely spent with that. I maybe get a couple of hours of wiggle room in the week to do other things. So, when a dealer, there's a lot of requests that customers will make of dealers to do seemingly small things. And it can be anything from, well, could you use real stamps, commemoratives from the 60s on my envelope when you mail it out instead of your definitives that you're using? And and yeah, maybe for me to sit down and make the $3 of postage up with 1960s commemoratives. I mean, that means I have to basically lick, 50 stamps, and I have to find them, stamps that I'm willing to use as 5-cent stamps instead of selling them. Um, and then I have to, after I've gotten the postage together, I have to actually lick them all and put them on the envelope and arrange them nicely and make sure that they don't get pen canceled by the person at the post office, and they all come through for the other person. We may be talking about, half an hour minimum of time spent to do that one little favor for. That doesn't generate any additional money. It's not covered in any way by anything that I've done. Um, but if I have that 2 or 3 hour window of wiggle room in the week, I can accommodate a few of those things, but not a whole lot. If a customer sends me a want list, a $20 want list for stamps that I don't actually have in stock per se, but they might be lying around the office somewhere in various collections, but just not organized into one central place. I might have to spend 2 or 3 hours rooting through my office to find them. And again, that might be all of the allowance I've given myself that week for other things. So, this might be why if you make a request of a dealer for something and they tell you they're going to do it and they don't do it right away, um, for several weeks, that could be the reason, because they only got a very small amount of time that they can spend on things outside of their core business, um, to 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 deal with other things. And your particular request is taking up so much of that they just don't get around to deciding on it or committing to it. So then that's an explanation for it. I'm just going to refer to this quickly here. So yeah, okay. So another thing that the dealers are facing, um, besides it being harder to make a living because of prices, is increased competition from their own customers. So, it used to be to become a stamp dealer in 1985, before the internet, you had to have a very large stock of stamps because you didn't have any quick, cheap way of getting to people and advertising and showing your wares, um, to people. There just wasn't. The only way you could showcase something or advertise in 1990 or 1985 was you had to have a print ad, and it had to be in color, and it was tremendously expensive to put together. Everything was analog back then, it wasn't digital. So it had to actually be set up and printed and then distributed. Whereas today, I mean, you can take an image on a phone, you can upload something to a platform and have something out online in a matter of minutes. But that wasn't possible back in the day. So there was a huge entry, there was a huge barrier to entry to become a stamp dealer. There were several. There was a capital barrier, but there was also a cost barrier in terms of advertising and communications costs that made it such that if you were going to become a stamp dealer, you had to make sure that you had lots of stock to be able to meet the demand, because There was also not, it was also harder to buy back then and harder to get hold of um, larger collections of material because of all of the things that I've just mentioned. You couldn't, there was no stamp auction network in 1985. So if I wanted to go and buy as a dealer, I couldn't just jump online and bid from a dozen different auction houses. It just isn't possible. Whereas today it is. So because of that, it just you if you were going to be a stamp dealer, you had to commit to it, and you had to have a plan, and you had to have capital. Now, any collector with some duplicates and a catalog and an eBay account or a hip stamp account can fancy themselves a part-time dealer. Most of those people who have those accounts have no other overhead. And in their mind, they don't have any costs. They don't have any employees. They're not registered to remit HST or sales taxes. So they don't charge them. They're very hard to compete with because they're not, they're only looking to sell the stamps that they have. So the idea of having to be consistent and having to replenish their inventory and having to be able to offer whatever it is they've just sold again isn't there. So they don't have to factor any of that in when they're selling their items, which means that they can sell at a much lower price because for them it's just found money. And so you've got, dealers as a whole competing with thousands and thousands and thousands of these sellers, these part-time sellers. Um, and as a whole, even though each seller is very small, when you take them as a whole, as a group, it's very formidable to try to compete with that because they have all kinds of advantages that you don't have. And at the same time, they don't have any real skin in the game. Because, as I said, in the majority of instances, as soon as they're finished selling whatever stamps it is in their collection they want to sell, they're done, and their account goes dormant until the next time they put them up. I mean, if I should be so lucky as a dealer to be able to do that, I can't. I mean, I have a weekly auction, and I've created an expectation amongst my customers that come when the auction closes on Wednesday next week, I'm going to have another 500 lots up on the website the following day or within the following couple of days. My auction would lose momentum in a hurry if I just, you know, didn't have anything one week and shut it down and didn't start it up for 2 or 3 or 4 months or a year. I mean, it would be a completely different thing um, to what it is it, without that. So I mean, so there is that competition, that competitive element, and then on top of that, and this is maybe the biggest pressure that dealers have had to face is that as a society, we've moved away from what I would call relational commerce towards transactional commerce. Now, what do I mean by these two things? So, relational commerce is commerce between parties that is focused primarily on value creation and exchange, and it has a long term focus. So, the way that I've described stamp dealing or ideal stamp dealing is relational commerce. You have a customer, and by its very definition, a customer is somebody that prefers to deal with you over the competition. They are aware of what your value proposition is as a dealer. They agree with it. They find that they obtain value in doing business with you that they don't get from your competitors, and so they choose you, which means to an extent they seek you out. They're loyal. But the loyalty isn't, it's not blind loyalty. They're not loyal to you for no reason. They're loyal to you because you are giving them consistently an experience that squares up and comports with what they feel they should be getting as a customer. And so it's earned. There's a high degree of empathy in relational commerce between the parties. Each party is interested to know what the other party wants because their primary interest is in delivering the value the other person wants. And the only thing that they're really trying to figure out as a business is if they can do it and what price they have to charge in order to make it feasible to do. The buyer in the customer in the relational commerce model is his concern or her concern is whether or not they can afford to pay the price, but they don't have a specific issue with the price itself. They're fully comfortable that the price reflects the value received, and there's a certain amount of goodwill and trust that develops in those kinds of relationships because of their long term nature that allays any concerns that the customer might have about whether or not the business is serving their best interests or giving them the best deal. Um, that used to be the norm. That was the way most businesses functioned when I was growing up. When I was a lot younger in the 1970s, it was that way in most businesses. I mean, if you went to a shopping mall and you went into most of the stores, the people working in those stores were usually there would be high school students there with a part-time job, but there would be a manager, there would be a supervisor who was knowledgeable in the product, and that was the supervisor's job, was working in that store. There were retail employees who were career retail employees, and they were extremely knowledgeable about the products. They were highly professional, and they were courteous, polite, and they knew their products, and you felt looked after when you walked into those stores. Um, Whereas, and we'll talk about it in a sec, I'll contrast it, but with what it would be like today. But it extends to all the other services and things that you can think of, really. Um, Everything was almost exclusively relational. Then, starting in the late 1990s, I would say, and into the early aughts, we had to move a tremendous move away from relational commerce to transactional commerce. So transactional commerce is, you can think of it, it's the opposite of relational commerce. It's entirely short-term focused. In fact, it's really the commerce equivalent of a one-night stand. There's no thought given to future transactions with the counterparties. Everything is done to get the most value in just that transaction. And so because of that, almost all the emphasis that's placed on it is on price. Everything is the competitive pressure is to produce the good or service as cheaply as possible, as quickly as possible, and with as few bells and whistles as possible. There's no loyalty and no empathy in that particular type of model. And in that type of model, it's almost incorrect and misleading to refer to customers because the reality is a business in that setting doesn't have customers. What they have are buyers. And the difference is a buyer has no loyalty to anything except the price. Um, I've I've had customers like this, and I'm basically hesitant to call them customers because all they cared about was the price of the stamps. And they were very, very vocal about letting me know that they didn't care who they bought their stamps from. Uh, if I had the lowest price on something, they would buy from me, but if I didn't, they'd buy it somewhere else. And they didn't perceive anything that I did as adding any value whatsoever to the experience of the transaction. Um, so I mean, it's common now when you're dealing in most settings to deal with people who think this way. Um, it's before, whereas in relational commerce you had creation of value and exchange of value. Transactional commerce is all about extraction of value and redistribution of value. There's very little value created. If you look at so what's happened is that these large disruptors in the economy, and the disruptors are companies like Amazon, eBay, Uber, Airbnb, um, Walmart. These are all companies that are basically disruptors. They didn't create anything new. They've come in, they've taken entire industries and entire sectors of the economy, and they've reorganized them to turn them from relational commerce based industries into transactional ones. And then they've sucked up all the surplus, all the extra gravy that was there that kept everybody gainfully employed and feeling like they got the most value. They've sucked up for themselves and distributed to their shareholders. That's the basic economic model that we live in now for everything. And it's come that way with stamps in the form of eBay and Hipstamp. Um, by creating, I mean, eBay and Hipstamp encouraged collectors to become dealers, except that unlike genuine professional dealers who have reputations to protect, investments in staff, um, investments in building a particular reputation, and in actually accomplishing a certain mission for the hobby as a whole. Um, because remember, they're not just selling stamps as well. Many of the people running these businesses are also blogging, researching, publishing. They're trying to actually move the hobby um, forward. Those people are facing increasing pressure from people who are only in it to sell off a few duplicates. So they've created this whole um, environment where you as a dealer are competing against your own customers, which is an almost unwinnable battle. Um, it's undermined prices because it's a race to the bottom. Uh, and because a lot of the dealers that are operating in these small eBay accounts, a lot of them just don't have enough knowledge or enough professionalism to actually describe everything consistently and correctly. So, having scores of those types of sellers out there represented as dealers, it actually lowers collector confidence in dealers themselves. Um, because before, the barriers to entry were such that you actually had to have some competence and you had to know what you were doing to be able to last in it. But there isn't that importance now. You can go and open an eBay account, and it doesn't matter if you last. You just have to. You can be open for 6 months and gone 6 months from now, and it's not engendering confidence in the profession as a whole. So these types of pressures are very, very, very acute for dealers. And I'm not even talking at this point about people who are starting a business. I'm talking about established dealers like myself, people I've been in it now for 10 years, 10 years on my own. I mean, I've had much exposure to the trade earlier when I worked for Gary Lyon or when I worked for WIDA in Vancouver, or when I worked for Fred Eaton. or Daniel Eaton, I should say, when he took over Eaton and Sons. Um, I've worked for many different people, but I've had 10 solid years since I left my firm um, in this trade. And I'm now at the point in year 10 where I don't have to have my primary focus be how am I going to stay in business or avoid going broke. I can actually focus on my mission of trying to improve the auction, trying to improve, and when I say improve it, I mean provide more earlier material, provide a better mix of modern to early, just raise the overall game of what I'm able to supply. Get into areas like classic US and actually put in some good material that I couldn't afford to buy before because I have access to better credit and I've built my relationships with other auction houses so that they trust me more and I can buy more stuff from them. These are all things that take time to develop, and I wasn't in a position to do those things before. Um, and I'm now in a position to do. But even so, even with the fact that I don't have to be completely focused on these pressures, they're still there. And they're still gnawing away at my customer base and my ability to make a living. They're always there. And I have to be aware of them and I have to counter them. But if I'm a collector, if I'm a dealer who's just starting out, if I go back to 7 years ago, 8 years ago, when I had just started um, my business, I mean, my these pressures are 100 times more acute because when you're in that position, your whole focus is on how not to go broke. And the worst part of it is that people, people I find are they don't like desperation and they don't like backing the underdog. Um, as much as even if they say they do, the majority of people want to back a winner and they want to go with people they think are successful. And when you're just starting out and you're in that position where you don't have a lot of money to put into the better material, you notice every missed sale, and you seem desperate. It's very hard to attract the first customers that you have. And it's hard to keep them because you just come off as so desperate to them. And that's a horrible place to be. Um, it's especially hard because when I started out, before I started the auction, I was doing a lot of blogging and a lot of writing, a lot of what's on my website now. When you go on my website and you look at my blogs, I don't even know how many articles are up there, but it's over 300. And those were deep, deep, deep dives where I would spend all day Thursday. I would start in the morning at like 6:30 in the morning. I would start researching and writing my material, and I would still be working on that blog post at midnight. And I would publish it at 2 o'clock in the morning. So all day long I've worked on it, writing research, because I would be researching the actual material and working on it while I'm producing the writing and the content. And then I had to photograph everything I was doing so you could see. If I was showing you a particular paper type or a type of tagging or something I saw, I took a picture of it, including ultraviolet pictures with my lamp and stuff. And I mean, it's tremendously, high resolution 1200 DPI scans to show you, small little fly speck constant varieties on modern commemoratives that are actually quite significant, but I'm trying to show you so you know what I'm talking about. And I did all of that, and I did all of that for a couple of years, and I would get people that would say, "Oh, what you're doing is so wonderful. It's so nice. It's great for the hobby." And I mean, I've got to tell you that I probably had on Facebook, I I must have had about 50 people who would regularly comment on my posts, like every one of my posts, and not one of them ever bought anything from me. And and again, I'm not saying that I'm entitled to people's business or I'm entitled to people's money. That's not it. I don't feel entitled. I feel honored every time I get the chance to help somebody build their collection. Um, but I'm saying that I was always acutely aware of the fact that the all 50 of these people who are commenting and not supporting my business, even though I'm contributing something for free to the hobby, they are contributing, they are supporting someone else. They're doing business with other people who aren't writing and publishing blog articles and offering free information. And that was hard. That was just a reality that I had to come to terms with and I had to make my peace with. It was hard to do then. I've since moved past it now, and I simply understand that I have to look at my mission as a dealer um, in much broader terms. I have to think, much larger than this, and I always have to go back to my why. I mean, I became a dealer. I was a chartered accountant working in Toronto as a partner in a mid-sized firm. And I'm not afraid to say it. I made at that time, I think my top salary was $160,000, which when I paid my taxes, I think I had something like $11,000 a month of cash. And, if my mortgage was 2 grand, I mean, I had $9,000 a month. I mean, that was a lot of money, at least from my perspective, it was. It was far more money than I have now, I'll tell you. I mean, back then when I worked as a CA, if my car broke down or it needed its maintenance, I just took it into the shop around the corner from the firm, which was a high-end shop, and I just would hand them my keys. Just say, "Yeah, here's my keys. Here's my credit card number. Call me when it's ready. I'll come pick it up." And I would pay the bill and I wouldn't feel it. I wouldn't be aware. I would know that I just dropped $500 on my car, but it would have literally no impact on how I felt in terms of money constraints that week. I could do that and go out for dinner every single week and it wouldn't matter. And I could go on vacations. I mean, I did a talk in England where I took my collection and I flew out on Friday, gave the talk on Saturday morning, went to my favorite restaurant in Covent Garden in London, had an exquisite dinner, and then got in a cab and went back to the airport and flew back. I mean, those are things I would never do today. A, because I could never afford them, but B, because I just when I made that kind of money, I just didn't appreciate it. I had no understanding at all for how wasteful and self-indulgent that kind of behavior was. I just wouldn't do that today. Um, but you know, I mention all of that because despite having that type of life, I was profoundly unhappy. Um, I was not fulfilled, and I knew somehow within myself that there was no meaning to this. That I could be abducted by aliens, and somebody else, some other accountant, would step in and do my work. Like it wouldn't matter if I was here or not or doing this. And with stamps, I've always been acutely aware of the fact that um, there's a great need. This is a very, very unique, wonderful hobby that everybody should have a chance, if they want to experience. It's important to keep it alive. And it's a hobby that has been suffering from identity crisis, I think. It's been suffering from a lot of people who don't have its best interests at heart and have been spreading a lot of misinformation about it in the last 20 years. In my opinion, for largely selfish reasons. I mean, there's some of it's innocent. They just don't know how to interpret what's happening correctly. But I think some of it's also selfish. You know, they want to be able to go and pick up estates for next to nothing and stamps, for 10% of what they're worth. And the easiest way to do that is to convince people that it's a dying hobby and that the market just isn't there. Um, and it's a very easy way to hoodwink people. And so I do think that that's a large part of what underlies that push. But it's been incredibly effective. Most lay people have the impression that this is a dead hobby. And so I looked at this and I knew I could hear the cries, the siren cries, that this is a hobby that needs somebody. It needs somebody with energy, somebody who cares about it, somebody who wants to push it forward, and it needs a champion. It needs somebody who will take their entire existence and devote it to this and make this their life's work. And that's why I'm in this business. I didn't get into it primarily to be a businessman. If I had my druthers, if I was a trust fund baby and I had, you know, $100 million in an account somewhere making money, all I would be doing is philatelic research. I would be researching every single thing I could get my hands on and trying to publish as many articles as possible before I had my last heartbeat. That's what I'd be doing because there isn't enough. There isn't enough time for me to do uh, detailed studies on all the areas that there are out there. It's just phenomenal. But I would be doing as much as I could, and I would probably be establishing some type of foundation and teaching other philatelists and giving other philatelists a chance to learn all the ropes so they could carry on my work. That's what I would be trying to do. But alas, I don't. I'm not. I'm just a kid from a lower middle class family that thought it was upper middle class when it wasn't. Um, and I didn't really inherit anything, and I won't. I've been through two divorces, so that was a huge financial hit. And the money I managed to build up after I recovered from divorce number two, that's basically gone. That funded me for the first 5 or 6 years of me running this business. So, I've had to step in and spend more time on the business aspect of things than I otherwise would have liked to, um, because I got to keep the lights on. I can't help anybody if I can't keep the lights on. I can't help anybody if I have to go and spend all my focus and time working on another job. So protecting my ability to be full time, to be on call, to be here and to be available has required me to make those sacrifices. I've also moved from Toronto to St. John, New Brunswick, which is a relatively inexpensive part of the country. Gave up that modern urban lifestyle that I had because it cost too much money to maintain it. So my partner and I, we moved out here. We gave that up so we could focus. So, I don't expect that people have to feel sorry for me, and I certainly don't want that. I don't want to make people feel like they owe me anything, because again, I don't feel that way. Um, I'm just trying to provide some perspective to the last point that I made, which is that when you're just starting out a business and you do all of those things, it can build up a very great deal of expectation in your head about what you think you deserve, what you think you should be getting, what you think you're entitled to. And the reality is that the world just doesn't see it that way. Um, and you're not probably going to get even a fraction of that. And you have to be okay with that. You have to get past that, and you have to get to the point where you're okay continuing in spite of that. So I've moved past that as a dealer now. As long as I can keep the lights on and I can keep buying material and I can keep running the auction, I'll continue to do that. And my hope is that eventually, as I start reducing my reliance on debts, I'll be able to hire more people, which will allow me to step away a little bit more, go back to my writing, go back to my research, and I'll see more content going up both on this channel and in my blog. That's kind of my long-term plan. But plans are just they're just that. They're plans. Life is going to throw a number of curveballs into these. I don't know yet what they're going to be. I mean, I think everything that's going on south of us right now may turn out to be a major series of curveballs. Um, I just don't know. I try not to think about it. But yeah, I think I don't know how helpful this has been in trying to shed some light on why dealers might be the way they are. I think part of what you might be seeing as well. I mean, I've covered some rational things that they're going through and why they might feel the way they feel, and I've given you some of my perspective. But I think some of it could also just be that they're upset about the way things have changed. I mean, it's very difficult if you were used to making, if you did a job where you made, I don't know, let's say you were paid $2,500 a month. Well, actually, let's give a good example with AI. So you're a content producer, you're a writer, and you produce content and you get paid $2,500 a month to produce content. And your employer comes to you and says, well, we can get this done by AI for next to nothing. We'll we'll pay you 1,000. Okay. So the value of your work just dropped by more than half. And so if you want to continue doing it and making a living, well, you can't just have one employer now. You got to have three. And so you initially you go and you get three and you're able to make it work, but then because of all this AI, you get all these people that start businesses to compete with you, which keeps forcing your value down. So what? Well, you were able to get 1,000 one month or 1 year. The next year you're only getting 750, and the year after that you're only getting 500. So your value's dropping, your work level's going up. The people are getting pickier about what they want out of you. I have a sneaking suspicion you're not going to be very happy. Your general demeanor is not going to be very cheerful because you're not. You've sunk so much into this. You're invested in it. You've got your in. I mean, if you're a dealer, you've got your inventory, and you've put a lot of sweat equity into it. Like the actual value, the actual fire sale liquidation value of your inventory is minimal. But you've written every single stamp up on a 102 card. You have everything graded. You have everything priced. You've got hundreds or thousands of hours of labor into your stock. So you're not going to want to leave. You're not going to want to get out of it. You're not going to want to retire. You want a chance to be able to get some of that time and money back. But in the back of your mind, you know that the trends are not really set up for that. And you're struggling with acceptance. So I think in a lot of instances, what you're seeing when you go to a show and you see a dealer who's bad tempered, or you come across one online, at least some of the time, what you're dealing with here is a grieving process. You're dealing with people who are aware of the fact that they either need to pivot in order to make their business work, and they don't know how to do it, or they can't, or they're not willing to because they just figure, look, I'm too old for this. I don't want to change what I'm doing. And they know that that's going to spell certain death for their business. They don't know when, but they know it's basically over for them. Or they they know that it's they want to pivot, but they're just afraid. They just don't know if they're going to be able to do it. And this is gnawing away at them. They're in various stages of the grieving process. They haven't hit acceptance yet, and they're upset. They're upset, and they're really upset at the situation. They can't really be upset at specific people, um, but they don't really know how to regulate that, or um, how to deal with the emotions around it. So I think that's part of it. And then the final thing, I mean, I talked about personalities at the beginning, but I think the final thing is that the majority of collectors um, are, and dealers fall into this range because I mean, almost all of us collect. We're we're kind of most of us, I think, probably on the neurodivergent spectrum to begin with. I don't think very many of us are neurotypical, and we're not generally blessed with the ability to regulate our emotions always as well as neurotypicals can. Um, so we tend to wear things on our sleeve a little bit if we're upset about the situation or about a customer, about what's happened. It's just harder for us to conceal it, and it comes out more. And it just it makes us appear to be arrogant or entitled or um, just angry when we may not be. Um, I mean, I'm sure that there are some dealers in the profession who are just legitimately bad actors, but I would say that the quantity of that has to be very low. And the simple reason is because um, so much of this business is built on reputation. So much of it is built around um, so much of it's built around trust that if you're a bad actor, you're not going to last at all. You're going to be out of business pretty quickly. Um, so I just don't think that's a major factor. Um, I think it's very unfortunate that this kind of animosity between collectors and dealers exists. I see it every time I'm on Facebook in any of the groups, and it's really quite unhealthy. Um, it's very, very important, and I hope I can do something to help address it because it's important to have a vibrant dealer class. It really is because, like I said, without us, the liquidity of the stamps is going to go down. And with that too, the availability. Um, I mean, we've already lost a great deal by not having retail the way we used to. Like a lot of stuff has become inaccessible, only accessible through large auction lots, and that's only going to get worse if online dealers themselves can't also make a living and they stop selling modern issues. I There are some issues I was asked this week if I would give pricing information to Unitrade for their newest catalog, and one of the things I said out up front was that they need to start overhauling their pricing of modern issues, and that they can't simply price things at double face value. That it's not enough of an incentive for dealers to stock modern issues, and it doesn't comport with the the scarcity of a lot of the modern issues now. Most post offices print far less now than they did in the 70s and 80s, and some stamps today, some of the new issues that come out are actually quite scarce. In that if you didn't get them when they were available at the post office, you're not going to get them. Uh, not that easily. So it's really up to the rest of us, I think, to try and do our part and to do as much as we can for the collectors. And a lot of us have to have thick skins, and we got to be willing to stay the course, even when things are hard. Some of the older dealers don't have the energy for that now. They just don't have enough fuel in the tank. And I'm hoping that there's enough other younger philatelists my age, maybe a little younger than me, maybe some people in their 30s who are up for the challenge, um, to take up the pair of tongs professionally and to come out with the right attitude that they're here to serve the collectors, and to do everything they can to make this hobby thrive. So I was just checking the live stream here to see if I had questions, and I see I've got one from David Nebel, asking if I'm going to upload the stream, and to which I will say yes, I will. Um, yeah, so I usually what we do here, just for those of you who aren't used to being on the channel or you're new, is I'll finish recording. My wife Steph will edit the video to take out my ums, which I was trying very hard not to put in. Um, but see, I just did it now. It's very hard for me to avoid. So she's gonna edit, or they, I should say, are going to edit that, to take out uh, the pauses and all the gaps, and that'll usually take a week to 2 weeks, maybe three, depends how busy they are. And then I'll upload it, and it will be there for you people to watch. So I don't see anybody else here at the moment. Just check one more time. Yeah, no, there's nobody here. So with that, I'm going to sign off and say thank you for joining me. It turned out to be another long talk, longer than I thought this would be. Um, but I guess all my topics, or most of them, are deep dives. I will start to get into shorter talks, I think, soon where I'm going to show you specific little lessons. One I had thought about doing actually was how to tell the difference between postally used and CTO. That one hit me because I was going through and a bunch of material to decide what to put into box lots and what to keep, and I came across Eastern Europe, all the canceled order stuff. And one area that is popular, but it doesn't get a lot of attention, is trying to find stuff from those periods that's actually postally used. And it raises the question: how do you? People often would soak the gum off of CTO stamps to make them appear to be legitimately used. And the question becomes, how do you tell the difference between a postally used Eastern Bloc country CTO stamp and the real thing? And I've come up with ways. I mean, once you deal with enough of these stamps, it's very easy to see. But I'll do a quick little video. I think that'll be my next topic. And I'll do a quick little one where I'll actually show you. I'll take some stamps. I'll show you some CTOs and some postally used, and I'll do some close up work and with my camera, and I'll show you exactly what it is I look for um, when I'm sorting these stamps. So I hope to do more of those types of videos where I'm just going to pick one little topic. Like it might be that, or it might be using an Instanta gauge to measure perfs. Like how do you properly use that gauge to get the right um, perforation measurement, or how to use a Stanley Gibbons color key in the way that it was intended to be used. Because I hear so many criticisms about the color key and about how it's no good. And I suspect it's because people don't know how to use it properly. And they don't, there's a specific technique to looking at color that you have to follow. Otherwise, you're going to get the wrong um, results with your eyes. So, anyway, those are all ideas for the future talks. I mean, there will be other controversial topics I'll cover in depth like this, but my hope is to try and get most of these down to 30 to 40-minute talks and with some room for questions and not me just yammering at you for an hour and a half. Anyways, thanks again for coming, and we'll see you next month. Okay, bye.